Over to you, Liberty.
Awesome. Hi, all. Looks like people are starting to filter in. We'll give everyone a minute or two to join us and get settled. Thank you so much for joining today. Let's see. We've got a good list here. Hi, all. See people coming in. Happy Tuesday / Monday. Say Monday, Tuesday. Short week though, so that's always lovely. Let's just give a minute or so. If you guys have any questions even before we start, please feel free to start populating the question and answer. And I'll try to get through as many as possible in the meat of the presentation, but we will try and keep this pretty interactive, or as interactive as we can with this format. So please feel free to drop any questions that you're hoping to get answered in our questions tab. Really excited about this topic, y'all. Oh, so actually I can answer that one easily. The first question came in already. Thank you so much. Yes, we are recording this and we can share this out after the call for sure. Thank you. All right, just letting people kind of filter in. We're going to get started here in a second. I don't know if anyone else was up late. We were promised, well, not promised. There was a potential of a very big meteor. They called it a meteor storm. I don't know if anyone else was out there looking. It was a meteor trickle, but we got some, so that was exciting. It was very late though. I don't know if any of you saw that. In Eastern time, it was around 1 a.m. So it's a late night, but worth it. I mean, when you see something like that, you have to see it. All right, let's give one more minute and then we'll get started. For those of you just joining, please feel free to drop questions throughout, or if you're hoping that we hit something in particular, please feel free to drop it in the questions now, and I'll try to just get through it during the course of the presentation. If at any point you have questions, please drop them. You don't need to wait till the end, although we do have a time at the end that we will specifically focus on questions also. Thank you so much for joining us on this first day back from a long weekend. I know it can be hard as we're digging out. I hope all of your inboxes don't look just as gross as mine did this morning, although unfortunately I know that they probably do. It's been a busy go of it lately, which is a good thing. I'm really excited to speak to you guys about the Metaverse. At 5 minutes after, Anish, what do you think? Can we get started? Can I jump right in?
We do have quite a lot of people now. I think we can start.
Excellent. Beautiful. Thanks so much. So guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about the metaverse and what it means for life sciences companies today. And so for our agenda, I'll go through, I'll introduce myself, introduce Indegene, and then introduce the area of Indegene that I kind of come from in L&D. Then we'll ground, because all of this is new technology, new verbiage. So we'll ground in what we're talking about. What is the metaverse? What is the private metaverse, which we'll define? Then I'll talk about learning theory a little bit and the benefits that we see here in this particular application. Then we'll go into some use cases. Some will be grounded in the learning and development space. Some will be grounded outside of learning and development space. But I want to cover both just so you can see the spectrum, because the potentials here are incredible. It really is a game changer. We'll go into some examples and case studies that focus both on the L&D side and outside of L&D. And then I will share with you what I get a lot. After having these discussions, I've gotten several questions that kind of come up with more frequency. So we'll hit our frequently asked questions. And then, of course, we'll just hold some time at the end for any questions that you have. However, if during the course of this you have a question, please drop it in our question and answer. I'll pause during our conversation here and answer them as we go, or try to work them in, okay? Also, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. Let me know that there's a question that you'd like answered right then. I'm happy to be interrupted and keep this as conversational as possible, okay? So hi, I'm Liberty Clearwater. I lead Indegene's learning and development team from a growth perspective, business development capabilities, solutioning, innovation, and operations in the US. Always been a big learning nerd, loved reading and neuroscience, anything learning. Comets, is some of you who were on early just heard about comets and meteor showers. I have two young kids. I have Dakota, who is 9, and Mirabelle, who is 5. That keeps me a little bit grounded and very, very busy. I love reading and documentaries, which, as is noted here, makes me a hit. So if you have, at any party, if you have a soiree coming up, invite me. I come preloaded with fun facts, trivia fun, love it. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I love any and all soirees and can happily share with you some ridiculous facts that no one really needs. I have been with Indegene for about 6 years. Before that, I was with AstraZeneca on their learning and development team in the US and then globally. Okay, that's a little bit about me. My company, I'm with Indegene, and what we do is we really focus on organizations being future ready, which obviously dovetails nicely with our conversation around the metaverse. We look across life sciences companies, that's biotech, med device, pharma, to increase revenues or reduce costs. And then in that third bucket, automate or manage operations wherever possible. The way that we do that is with deep domain specialization. We work really closely in understanding our domain. We only focus here, so we understand the business really well and understand your problems as if they're our own, because this is the only place that we focus. We have a deep technology expertise, AI, ML, and we have a CTO officer that tries and works proactively on disrupting ourselves so that we are always on the cutting edge. And then the last thing is that we have a scalable and flexible operating model that allows us to have delivery both local to our clients, wherever that may be globally. And then we have innovation hubs and quality management that allows us to both scale up and down to support both those kind of emerging biotech and the top 5, top 10 pharma companies. So we work in both those in a very scalable way. Okay. Moving into L&D, learning and development, this is my home. This is where I focus in within Indegene. We are a full spectrum L&D partner, and what that means is that we start from a consulting place. We work very carefully and closely with our clients to understand their business need, and then we leverage our pretty deep tool belt. We have assessment, that's learning needs assessment, gap assessment, kind of understanding where we are today and where the future is tomorrow. Then we have our development arm, which develops everything from content to curricula and design, and then the actual modalities from 3D MOAs, as you see here. We have platforms, we have tech builds, we have off-the-shelf content, infographics, AI, ML, AR, VR, and we'll go into what all of those acronyms mean in just a second. Then we really try to take a measurement focus, and we'll talk a little bit about measurement within the metaverse here also during this conversation, because measurement is really key to everything that we do. I feel very strongly that learning and development is not a cost center. We just have to prove out our ROI more tangibly. And so everything that we do is rooted in how do we measure this and how do we prove the worth. We have a full design team within the L&D team, our creative design and learning assessment, learning design. And then operations is how we deploy. So we have an LXP. We work on all of the different delivery methodologies, including having FTEs that we can leverage for any organizations. So we bring it through from the consulting, development, design, and then through to deployment and measurement. Okay. Any questions so far before I get into it more? Okay. All right, so you've already heard a lot of letters, and I will try very hard not to use so many letters because it's all very new. When we're talking about the metaverse, it is truly very new technology. However, there are some letters that are thrown around often and that you may or may not be familiar with. Many of these components are built into your day-to-day, and you just probably aren't aware of where it kind of falls under in these buckets. So when we're talking about XR, that's extended reality. This is everything from live interaction through to AR, mixed reality, VR. This is being able to kind of bring those two together in a way that is synergistic, that is truly extending our reality that is around us. Okay, virtual reality. This is usually a user is in a completely immersed virtual environment, usually using one of these head-mounted devices or something similar. And it is where the user feels completely immersed in their surroundings. They've been taken into a completely new environment. Then we get into mixed reality. Mixed reality is where we lay 3D content over top your actual space and is environment aware. If you are familiar with, in Amazon, this try it in my space. So I think IKEA has it too. There are many places. Wayfair has it. Not that I'm an online shopper or anything, but they do. If you can see a couch in your room and you can point your phone at an empty space and it puts a couch on top of that empty space, that's environment aware. They understand what is there and can actually put something in your space that you can see it through the phone. And then augmented reality is not necessarily environment aware. It usually is built off of a trigger, like a QR code or a specific shape, and that will overlay content not necessarily aware of its space, but you can still look through the phone and see it. AR and mixed reality, augmented reality and mixed reality are very similar. If you've played with Snapchat with your kids and played with all those filters, that's a good example of those. And as we kind of move up the spectrum into virtual reality and then truly extended reality, this is kind of where we're talking about. Extended reality is where we're kind of thinking about holograms and other things like that. And then virtual reality is kind of where we're going to be based a lot of our discussion around for today. Okay, any questions in this alphabet soup? Lots of R's. I don't see anything coming in, so we're just going to move right along. All right, what is the metaverse? Also, as just a grounding, I am not a tech person. As a matter of fact, I do know just enough to be dangerous, and all of this is a little bit new from just it exists and is new. I am not going to be a developer anytime soon, and unfortunately, a couple of people on the call know this very well, but I know just enough to be dangerous. So please, if there is something that is too technical for me to answer, I will bump it up to those that can, and we'll get you an answer. So bear with me as I speak technically, but in layman's terms, because that's all I have for you. Virtual reality is immersing your user in a new environment, as we just talked about. Oftentimes when we talk about true virtual reality, it's usually asynchronous, meaning it doesn't much matter when the user logs in. It's just an individual experience and they're going to experience it by themselves. These are things like lots of virtual environments or games that you put the headset on and it's just you in a new space. They're incredible. They really do feel like you are in a new space, but it is just you in that new space. Now the metaverse, kind of the difference being, is that this is a shared and persistent environment. So whether you're in it or not, it exists, and other users can come into that environment and can interact, coexist at that same time. Okay. This can be either synchronous or asynchronous, right? You can do it together or you don't need to. But the metaverse is really the next iteration of kind of what online is. It's a public place, and it's not necessarily something that is, well, it's definitely not owned. It is decentralized, the same way that Google is to the internet, right? It's kind of a front end. You can't really talk about the internet without thinking about Google. That's kind of the way Meta and Facebook is to the metaverse, where they try to act as front doors, but the fact of the matter is the internet is not owned by anyone. Metaverse is not owned by anyone. It is completely open space. Web3 technology is something that you might have heard of, or Web3, something like that. That is based on the same nature of this decentralized environment. Blockchain, you might have heard of. That is what kind of enables these sorts of interactions to happen. That is where multiple users can kind of come in and interact in this shared persistent environment. If you're familiar with, probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago, there was something called Second Life. And it was a persistent virtual life that a user could adopt. It was not necessarily, it definitely was not in those headsets, but you took on a persona and you could do everything in that. You could interact with other people, you could have entire other lives, you could advertise there. It's similar to that. I think that once that came up, it was just a little bit ahead of its time. Now we're really here where there is a truly another platform for us to experience life through. The same way the internet has truly revolutionized the way that we do everything. The metaverse is poised to do the same thing and just change the way we interact and the way that we communicate, in that we have a whole separate environment and space in which to do that now that we did not have before. There is a drawback of this beautiful decentralized idea. It's that there's not a single set of defined standards that comes with the metaverse, because it is decentralized, because one person owns it. And we went through this with the internet also, but because it's decentralized, there are not a set of standards that exist today that creates some concern about having compliant conversations in the metaverse, in this public space. However, that does not mean that this is where this ends. So right now, what we're doing is we've coined a term, private metaverse, and it's shared virtual reality space, the same way the metaverse is. However, we are taking it outside of that public realm for right now. So if you've built an app in your organization, you've probably made sure that it was not visible to other users in the public domain, and you've allowed only specific users to go in. Very similar to that, right? You're taking it out of that public space. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about the potentials. And once we get a secure place, a secure way to have compliant conversations, this will go through a second boom. But we don't need to wait for that in order to leverage a lot of the phenomenal things that are allowed to us within this metaverse environment. The private metaverse is unable to be accessed publicly. It allows for, again, a predefined users. We can either send it directly to their headset or have only certain users kind of able to see things. That means that users can be managed, and obviously that's very important from a life sciences perspective. And we don't necessarily need to go through the established app stores. This could be completely outside of that. So you've created your own essentially safe space out in this public arena. You've created a little bubble, a little island to allow this shared virtual reality, allow these conversations to happen in a safe space. Any questions there?
Hey, Liberty, there are a few questions for us. I'll just read them out to you. The first one is, will there be some specialized coding or programming that will be required to create this metaverse?
Yes, great question. So the place where this first started, the Metaverse idea, actually it came about from a couple of different places, but one of the biggest places that's using it today is games. So a lot of this is actually built on gaming platforms, and the kind of development that we're seeing uses certain pieces, Unity, Photon, things like that, that are actually game platforms. So the type of development is different than the development that we've done typically if you've done an app, or most of the things that we've done in life sciences are usually a certain type of coding. This is a completely different skill set.
All right. Moving to the next question, can you speak a little more about the accessibility in the metaverse? Like, can anyone access it, or like, will there be some web links that we currently use for sharing websites and getting into platforms? So how will this work in the metaverse?
Sure, great question. So there are a couple things as far as accessibility goes. One, we want to make sure that everyone can access the same thing, right? We want to make sure that we are being ADA compliant, as well as understanding that everyone can get in. There are a few barriers. One, you have to make sure that you have this sort of a headset for this sort of environment where it's completely immersive. We can create a similar experience. Actually, in this screenshot here, this is in a meeting that we had where we're showing things to each other. This is an actual meeting that we had, I don't know, last week, the week before, something like that. But you can actually have a 2D interaction also, where you have video form the same way that we're on video right now. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the headset in order to access these places where you're having these conversations. Some people, it's very small, but there are some people who fall out from an accessibility standpoint because they get motion sickness. In the headsets that we recommend, which is the Oculus, at this point, Quest 2, that's the best that we have right now. It's very low latency, which means that the likelihood of being sick is pretty low. However, you're always going to have about 1% that fall out. So you do need to think about that from just an accessibility standpoint. From a how do you get the links and things, typically it depends on the way that we deploy these assets, but oftentimes it's going to be through a side load or pushed out directly to the headsets that we need. We want to avoid at this point any public spaces, usually, depending on the use case, but usually it's outside of public spaces. Does that answer it?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Over to you.
Perfect. All right. Next, we're going to get into some of the learning benefits. Because I come from a learning background, this is the part that I'm really excited about. And it's, to me, the part that is the biggest gain, right? Virtual reality has been very, very exciting. But when we change it from virtual reality into kind of this metaverse and shared experiences, that's kind of where I get really excited. So I wanted to take a second and ground us in neuroplasticity, which seems like we're taking a step back and out of this metaverse, but bear with me for a second. In order to learn as an adult, we have to think about learning. We have to actually try, which is unfortunate, right? Our kids can just literally be immersed in whatever it is, whether it's a new language or something is around them, they will just pick it up. But after 25, your brain changes and you have to go through actual physical steps in order to take on new experiences. There's a myth out there that says every experience that you have changes your brain. That is not true. Only experiences that you pay attention to actually change your brain. So in order to achieve plasticity or learning, you have to be alert. You have to be focused. The first piece is being alert, right? Making sure that you're purposefully alert. Awake is not enough. You have to be paying attention and kind of keyed in. This allows your brain to release certain chemicals, one of which epinephrine or adrenaline. And that allows us to kind of set the stage for the next piece, focused attention. When we're here in this sort of a format, we have distractions, right? We have our phones, we have whatever's happening outside. However, you need to reduce your signal to noise, that's the technical term, ratio, in order to actually point your brain at what you're focused on. So if you have a ton of things around you and you're trying to learn, I mean, this is common sense, it's very, very difficult. If you put yourself in a quiet room with no distractions and you're focused up, it's much easier to take on that learning, right? That's going to be key for what we're talking about in a second as far as these benefits go. Another big one that we forget very often is that you have to accept frustration. And as an adult, frustration is actually necessary and beneficial to learn. Our brains don't realize that we need to pick up something new until we fail. And that's just, again, one of these beautiful things that our brains have done to make sure that we are really focused on what makes sense for our survival and moving forward. So if we're not doing something right, that's a clue to our brains to say, oh, wait, stop, we need to stop. We need to actually focus up and we need to really pay attention on what we're doing wrong in order to do it right. So a safe place to fail and having frustration kind of built in is really important, and it's a very positive sign. And then something that this metaverse is not necessarily going to help you with, but just I need to put it out there, is that sleep is super important for the learning, right? We can do all of this, and then if someone just, continually stays up or doesn't, it's not necessarily just sleep, but non-sleep deep rest after focused learning sessions are really important. That's just a plug for making sure that we're adding rest throughout our curriculums. All right, then as we think about the metaverse and private metaverse, we want to think about our learning benefits. The first one that I put here is actually step 2 of what we talked about with the neuroplasticity. In these headsets, they are quite literally blinders on your face. All you can focus on is what is in front of you. You cannot see your phone. You cannot hear anyone around you. You're only in this space. That is completely unique in our learning environment. We can even put people in a workshop and they could be distracted by literally anything. Their phone in front of them, they can still check email on their laptops if they've got it there on their phones. They can be looking at the person next to them and wondering what's in their purse or whatever else. In here, you have only the thing in front of you, only the conversation that you're in, and that's huge. That is truly something unique and will change the way that people learn because they are focused there, and that's something that unfortunately is very difficult to capture otherwise. The next big benefit is that it's engaging and novel. That brings us to that first point of neuroplasticity that I just talked about, which is that alertness, that attention. If it's new, if it's different, if it's novel, it's exciting to your brain. It's exciting and it's interesting for us to pay attention to. So this is novel, our brains are interested, and now we are literally sitting with our blinders on and we're focused. The third piece is our shared learning experiences. The metaverse is different than our just typical VR in a few ways, but one of the biggest ones is that I think it's very important that we're working with others or doing shared experiences and peer learning. People learn better from people, and especially peers in their own roles. So this allows us to have peer learning that's not necessarily just workshops or people who are co-located. You can still take advantage of peer learning, synchronous learning, really looking at people face to face and having these conversations regardless of their geography or where they're located. Then we get into our safe place to fail. This allows people, and we'll talk a little bit about a case study that's really focused on verbalization and practice, but allowing people a safe place to fail is exceptionally important. Oftentimes when we get people in workshops or whatnot, again, as we're teaching people new things, we ask them to verbalize a few times. However, it's never enough. Surveys consistently show that learners want more time to practice because that's the most important thing, right? For them to be able to understand what it is that they're doing. They're really excited about practicing and they never feel like it's enough. This gives them that safe place to fail and it's permanent so they can go in whenever they'd like. So you have all of the pros of in-person. It's much more cost effective. There's no lodging, there's no meals. It's putting people in a shared space together for short periods of time and then allowing them to move on. So it's in person without it being very expensive, which it gets very expensive to bring people together. All right. Within learning and development, we have some immediate use cases, and these utilize our private metaverse. However, we can also talk about some of those public metaverse pieces in our other use cases. We just talked about verbalization and selling skills. This is really important, again, to be able to just let people talk to each other and try things out, see what feels comfortable for them, and literally just verbalize. Coaching and mentoring here, being able to see one another. It's a lot more immersive than our videos. You actually can make eye contact avatar to avatar, and it feels very real. So coaching and mentoring is beautiful here. You can put them actually in their troubled space. So if you're having someone who's maybe, let's say we have a rep who is really struggling with questioning, you can put them in the space. You can have them role play early and often, whatever you'd like. Mentoring is the same way, right? You can actually put people in rooms and have them try on different things, different affects, different things that you want them to take on, right? Try a different level of confidence here. What would it look like when you you have absolutely no reason to think that you're going to fail? And those are sorts of things that you can try on in this space and create that safe space for our learners. Diversity and inclusion is a very big topic right now in training in general. This is a great, again, safe place to do it. You are able to create spaces, you're able to create avatars, you're able to create scenarios that are very real to life and true to life, and you're able to have these really phenomenal discussions. Any soft skill training, obviously, in this space, communications otherwise are really, really positive. And then obviously the harder skills also. We'll talk actually next about anatomy and physiology in this space, med device skills, like turning it over, looking at things. Everything is much more real than even a couple of years ago in VR. This is an example of us teaching some anatomy and physiology. As we see, we have a beautiful heart here in like a museum gallery space. So this is a multi-user experience. You can have several avatars in the space. A teacher or a coach could be guiding you through this. This could also be just user peers. It doesn't necessarily need to have the coach there, but a coach can actually walk you through, point out different parts, and you have your class around you. It's as if you've gone into a space like this, into an actual museum, and are able to have these sorts of discussions like you would at maybe a university where you're in a lecture hall and you're able to all look at the same thing and have those conversations. This is moving. Obviously, it's still in my deck. However, you can actually see the lub dubs, and you can look very closely at the physiology. You're able to actually remove layers and see inside the heart. You're actually able to have some really great conversations using essentially a manipulative without being in a classroom using a manipulative. There are many different ways that this could be done. This is just an example. And there you see that you can actually have some like offshoot conversation bubbles. You can have different things within these sorts of spaces. I'll pause for a second because I know I just threw a lot at you between the L&D case study and this before I go into some outside L&D stuff, and then we'll dive into more examples. Any questions at this point?
Liberty, there is a question from one of the participants. It's around the use cases. So could you share a few use cases for medical affairs projects?
Great. Thank you. I don't know if that was a plant or not, but I really appreciate that question because we're moving into this space. So Metaverse is a great example of, it depends on where in Metaverse, but you could still have some really great discussions around verbalization, things like that, being able to have those good conversations. So even just putting people in a space and practicing having those conversations, you're able to do a lot of skill training in there, whether that's hard or soft. And that's ubiquitous, right? Everyone is going to need that. You can also interact with HCPs. So HCP detailing is listed here. This is one of those pieces that eventually in the public metaverse, we see that it's happening, and we're on a fast track. We're getting to the place pretty quickly where we will have a safe place in the public metaverse to be able to go out and actually speak to our doctors, and not only do detailing, but have those MSL conversations as well. have, those good conversations. Going kind of the wrong way on this slide, congresses and advisory boards also work here. Being able to have these people, HCPs, KOLs, in these spaces is very easy for them, right? You can ship them a headset and they take no time out of their day, and you're still able to have the phenomenal conversations that you're able to have at congresses and advisory boards, where in the past couple of years when it's been more, not necessarily actually Zoom, but kind of Zoom based, where it's videos, you're starting to see a lessening of some of those really phenomenal conversations that kind of popped up organically, maybe around the water cooler, and then got brought into a panel discussion. I'm sure everyone's been in a panel discussion that starts with, I was just talking to someone in the lobby about blah, blah, blah. And that's actually happening now in these metaverse conversations because we're allowing the space for that. Those sorts of off to the side conversations cannot be understated about their importance. And it allows us to have really phenomenal conversations in kind of a more structured setting. So those congresses, advisory boards, this works really well. Those immersive spaces where we're able to let people just go, right? A lobby space is huge and it's so important. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Patient education and patient experience is huge here. In a couple of slides, I'll go over some really neat examples in patient education and patient experience. Gamification, we talked about how this started. The metaverse kind of started and is most popular for things like Fortnite, Roblox. If you have young kids, you probably are too familiar with those terms. But gamification obviously is very huge in the L&D space. It's huge in most of our business world because it works. Being able to make these serious games, multiplayer serious games, is very important and really creates impactful learning experiences. So we just looked at that heart. We could actually do a magic school bus style, right? Go into the heart. You could watch disease spread, maybe adjust the conditions and see how the disease reacts, right? Maybe you could introduce the molecule and watch how the MOA works from inside. You have some phenomenal opportunities with gamification. HCP education, for all the same reasons that I just listed for L&D, it makes sense for HCPs. They are very busy, and that novel focused attention, real life practice, I mean, all of that is just, it's embedded in what we should be doing for our HCPs. Also, empathy and patient journeys come through really, really clearly because you are able to put someone in a completely different environment than they might be used to. And then skills training, both hard and soft, we've kind of already talked about. The only one that I did not touch on, I think, in either the last slide or this one is the sales and business development. Goes a little bit hand in hand with HCP detailing, and this is really going to be focused when we're able to get more into like the public metaverse, where we're able to have more organic conversations with people that we may or may not be focused on and have a predefined user list. Okay. This is a case study on something that we are doing for a learning and development team. This is a top 10 pharma company. What we've created are these safe spaces to fail, safe spaces to verbalize and practice. They'll be using this for new hire practice on through when they're in the field. And what we've created is a set of spaces and then some verbalization checklists, CVAs, and things like that. Our reps will be able to actually do exactly the same thing that they're being asked to do, verbalize sales calls. So you have a hotel lobby, people will be dropped in here. This is that water cooler experience that I was talking about earlier, where people will just be able to talk. They'll also be able to acclimate to the environment, look at each other's avatars, get all the kind of strangeness about taking on a new technology out of the way. They're going to immediately become immersed in this situation and realize very quickly how natural speaking to someone is in the metaverse is when you're in this hotel lobby. From there, they'll have an option to be dropped into different parts of a doctor's office. And again, this is for our, the use case here was new hires in a pharma, a top 5 pharma, and it's focused on a a drug, right? So they need to practice their verbalization at different places. So we have a reception area, and this will be some time where they're able to choose what role they want to play, whether they're going to be the rep or they're going to be the provider. And then they will go through and have a conversation. And either those conversations will be very positive and the reps will feel like, yes, absolutely, I would let you in to see the doctor, or they can just practice overcoming up any observations that they have, any obstacles that they might have. So you can practice here, because the first time you hit one of those that are very difficult, if you get a receptionist who says, I'm sorry, we don't see reps, in real life, it's very difficult to compose yourself. But once you've practiced here several times and it feels like you're in the doctor's office, you're able to keep going without any problem. You have the different environments. You have the actual doctor's office. We also, not pictured here, but we have a hallway sample closet for those quick 2-minute. I know you're super busy. I just wanted to say, you know, this 30-second pitch and move right along. You can really hone those skills here. You're able to choose your role and continue on. It is both structured in that you have your CVA in the metaverse where you're able to practice. You have observation checklists if you are the person playing the provider, but it's unstructured in that you don't necessarily need to go from one to the next, which allows people to practice early, often, kind of frequently, and be able to get in from the very beginning of their new hire journey all the way throughout, kind of as they'd like. Or does it make sense from the trainer perspective? So as we talked about very early on, measurement is super, super important to us. So even before we really started building this out, we started thinking about both qualitative and quantitative ways to measure. And this is ongoing, so I don't have the final outcomes, but I just wanted to share with you kind of the KPIs and business case that we put together in order to move this forward. So on the qualitative side, right, we wanted to make sure that this was an incredible user experience, an incredible learner experience. They wanted to know that the team felt proud of kind of what they were joining. We wanted to allow reps to practice verbalizing early and often, and we wanted to increase the sense of community. That's something that is very difficult to keep high in this more decentralized world. Post-COVID, we might have some people returning back to offices. We have doctors' offices that are not nearly as welcoming, and that sense of community sometimes gets lost. So being able to increase that sense of community was really important. We wanted it to be fun and engaging for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, as far as making sure that things are novel. We wanted to make sure that that was built into the measurement, right? We wanted people to feel like they were excited to be here. And then we wanted to introduce a familiarity to the technology. We feel very strongly that this is coming soon, coming hard and fast, and will be much more ubiquitous than it is now. So being early adopters and being kind of early to this game means that they're going to have an edge when it becomes the norm. People who felt comfortable facilitating in Zoom or these sorts of presentations had an edge when COVID hit because everyone else was just learning how to present appropriately. So it's the same sort of situation where once you are in and you're an early adopter, you then have an edge when other people are just kind of getting up to speed. On the quantitative side, we wanted to see a percentage increase in skill development and proficiency over our baseline peers. It's obvious, right? We want to make sure that they're seeing better skill development and proficiency. We also wanted to see a percentage of engagement increase above our baseline peers. Now, again, we feel like this is built in, but we wanted to make sure that it was proven out in our measurements also. We also wanted to see retention rates, if those changed class over class. Obviously, as we know, new hires have a pretty high turnover rate. Unfortunately, it's just kind of the world that we live in, and those are very expensive hires. Any hire is an expensive hire. So we wanted to see if people were able to be retained more if they felt better prepared, or if they felt like they were in this kind of more engaging environment. And then, of course, we wanted to see dollars saved. We expect that we'll be able to bring in people less in person with this. So we want to see straight dollars saved on top of all of the other measurement pieces. Like I said, this is not yet out of its initial phases, so we don't have these numbers, but I can't wait to share them with you. All signs point to very, very positive outcomes. I will pause for a second because the next one kind of our next example talks about patient experience. So I'll just want to pause in case there's anything about what I just shared or learning and development specifically.
Liberty, there are a few questions on the chat box, and I'll start with the first one. It talks about the AR model that you spoke about a few slides back. So can these AR models be dynamic moving models with real-time imaging?
So real-time imaging is an interesting component there. And I'll be very blunt again, that I am not the tech person. So the real-time component, I will put a pin in and we'll get back to you about that component. However, dynamic moving models, absolutely. The heart that I showed a couple slides back is definitely a moving model. Probably should have shown a movie there. But yes, you can definitely move things around, and because it is essentially a game, it's full automation. Like, it looks beautiful, right? It looks seamless. As far as real-time imaging, I can certainly get back to you.
Sure. The second question is around the fact that pharmaceutical, the space is very regulated. So are there any concerns while using the metaverse for engaging patients and engaging with HCPs?
Absolutely, yes. So yes, as we kind of talked about, that decentralized nature of the metaverse is both beautiful and difficult. It means that we do not have a common set of standards, and therefore our compliance and regulatory standards, it's tough, right? We feel very strongly that there will be an answer to this and how to compliantly have good conversations with patients and HCPs. Today, the way that we're working around this is using these private metaverse, right? It's essentially shared virtual reality with predefined people. So that works better, obviously, with our HCP population than it does with patients. But either way, as long as we have a predefined list and can make sure that it's very, that we have a set list of users, then we can make sure that there are no regulatory concerns, because we can build to our own standards. Once we open it up to the public, that's kind of where it gets hairy, because you're using someone else's platform and that security layer is not necessarily built in. It's a long answer to, I don't think we're quite there yet to have engaging conversations with patients and HCPs, but there are ways around it to have components of those conversations.
All right, all right. We just got another question, and it goes like, what has been the perspective about not having body language represented with the avatars in soft skill training or giving feedback?
So we actually do have body language. I'm just going to scroll back here to this example of one of our meetings. You can kind of see, this is not the best example, but you have full use of your hands and your facial expressions. You have where you're able to make eye contact. You're actually able to high five, and it feels like you're high fiving because it makes some sort of, like, it's not exactly hepatic because it's just your hands, but it makes a sound and like little sparks and whatnot. It feels very much like a natural interaction. So as you can kind of tell, I'm Italian and I use my hands constantly. I use my hands constantly in the metaverse too, and it shares the same way. So you do have your full suite of features there, minus legs for some applications, but I don't know how often we use our legs in body language. Like this application, we do not have legs, but you have your whole upper body, you have your mouth movement, your eyes track. And then one of the other big components, and one of the reasons that I really love the Oculus Quest 2 over some of the other platforms and head-mounted devices, is spatial audio. So in this screenshot, you see I'm actually at the end, and then Megan is next to me. In my headset, it sounds like Megan is right next to me. In a video setting, right, it just sounds like voices coming out of my computer or wherever else. In this scenario, or if we're talking about, let's say, our hotel lobby, it feels like you're in that space from an auditory perspective. So not only do you have your body movements, but it actually feels like, from an auditory standpoint, that people are actually located in the space around you, which it's very difficult to visualize until you're in it and you see someone sitting next to you that sounds like they're sitting next to you. I very often have a physical reaction when someone in the metaverse feels like they're too close. Obviously, that's not a thing, but it is right there. And between the seeing them so closely, seeing the eye movements, seeing your mouth move, seeing your hands, and then the voice, it all feels very real, and your brain very quickly adapts and you feel like you're there in that same space. So you actually do take a lot of your body language in. I feel like now when I'm on Zoom calls, it's much less engaging than these sorts of platforms, when before I felt like, how far off is video from being in real life? And it turns out it's pretty far. You do miss a lot, especially that spatial audio component. Does that help answer that?
It sounds fascinating. And so we are out of questions for now, but just a reminder to all to use the chat feature and the Q&A feature for sending over any questions that you may have.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm also being cognizant of the time. I know we're running up to the end, and I have a couple other things I want to chat with you guys about. Patient experience. This is something that is really, really cool to think about. I'm showing you two different pieces from patient experience in the VR headsets or metaverse space, but I wanted to share these particular pieces with you because they're two different sides of essentially the same thing. On the one side of my slide, we have VR headsets being used during wide awake surgery, they call it, at St. George. This is done with the NHS in the UK. So these were people who they were in a pilot group, and they're during wide awake surgery, and they wore headsets the whole time, both before and during the actual surgery. So in their experience, they were just transported to these exotic locations. Sometimes they had things like calming music or a guided meditation, but what they were seeing was essentially just a location. This was not true gamification. They were not interacting with other people. This was straight virtual reality. The results were phenomenal. All participants, 100%, said that wearing their headset improved their overall experience, right? In the day and age where patient experience is paramount, that every single participant said that this made their experience better is wild, right? That's incredible, and it feels like the holy grail. 94% felt more relaxed going through their procedure. The same procedure, the same situation that their peers were in, 94% felt more relaxed. 80% experienced less pain over their peers, and 73% said that they were less anxious. There was also a significant reduction in the amount of pain medication that was used both during the procedure and after the procedure. And sedation, which was offered, like light sedation. I don't know if you've been to like sedation dentistry where you're both awake, but you're more groggy. They didn't need it, almost across the board, almost categorically. So this is incredible from a patient perspective to be able to literally transport them to a different place. And you could obviously extrapolate different scenarios, right? Imagine kids on transplant lists can now be taken to completely different places and interact with their peers in new and different ways. The patient experiences here are incredible. Utilizing this for physical therapy is also something that's being done with phenomenal results. On the second half of this slide is changing gears a little bit, but they're using these sorts of pieces for exposure therapy for PTSD and phobia treatment. So the screenshot that I'm showing you there is actually from a program that was done for veterans from the Iraq War, but there was also one done for Vietnam Wars, obviously different settings. But they were put in these immersive scenarios that replicated their traumas. Exposure therapy in this way helped show significant improvement over trial groups, around 90%. It's wild. These numbers are absolutely incredible, but it shows how close you get and from people who are exposed in either talk therapy or whatnot to actually talk about their traumas versus actually being in that space, in that safe space to fail or safe space to experience something scary. And the closer the simulations got to reality, the better the patients did. So there was one trial that actually added smells, which obviously is not a component of the metaverse at this juncture. But the closer that you got and the more components that you added towards reality, the more real the graphics looked, the more similar it was, the better the patients did. Phobia treatment is the same way. And this was the article that I was reading, or the case study was around phobia for bugs. So I'm not a huge fan of, but it's not a big deal. However, they would have them put their fake hand, right? So they don't have their physical hand. They had fake hand that looks like your real hand, feels like your real hand, operates like your real hand, in a tank of bugs. And you would just watch the bugs harmlessly over your hand. Remember, it's not your real hand. People had incredible results here also. So these things are real for you. It's real for your brain. It's being used as a therapy. It's being used to change experiences. Also for patient education, it's kind of second to none. I'll pause. Okay. I'm just going to run through some of the other FAQs that I've gotten about this, as I've kind of spoken about it. I've spoken a little bit about why Oculus rather than the HTC headsets or some of the other headsets that are out there. A lot of the headsets are great, but for the reasons that I mentioned before, spatial audio, the low latency, the fact that these are widely available and haven't had any supply issues, Oculus is the way that we're trending. Don't people get motion sickness in the headsets? Yes, some do. It's about 1% of users, as we talked about early on in this discussion. And just like we would with any modality of learning, we need to make sure that we have a plan for accessibility, the same way that we have text transcripts for audio podcasts or base modalities, or accessibility plans for those that are maybe mobile impaired, for workshop participants, things like that. We just do need to think about those that fall out. Are headsets expensive and managing them is a pain? They can be. I mean, headsets are around about $300 each right now, which is not huge. We're talking about our different technology stacks. They can be rented or managed by a third party. And we're seeing them become part of the onboarding tech stack in a lot of organizations right now. So that could be something that you work with your IT and tech teams to see if that's part of their plan for the future. How long people can be in the environment. You want to start with short sessions. Generally about 30 minutes is a good goal to work up to. Personally, I've had hours and hours of meetings in a day in the Oculus, and it's been fine. I would not push it. I wouldn't love to be in there for maybe more than 2 hours, but an hour, certainly not a big deal. The Meta, so the makers of the Oculus recommend about a half hour at a point, at a training session. Generational, we all know that digital natives are more ready to adopt technology. However, we've not seen generational stumbling blocks. We've had all generations in this, and we've not had people who just don't get it or don't feel comfortable. It seems very open for all generations. But with any technology add, you do need to make sure that the instructions are super clear and that you're managing to all of the generations, not necessarily just the ones that are most comfortable. And then measurement is key. Everything can be planned for as far as the metrics out. It just needs to be put into an LMS-friendly format and needs to be planned for in the build process. All right, we are exactly at time. If you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them. I'll stay for a minute or two later. Also, this recording will go out to you guys. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Would love to have discussions about this with you. Any other questions?
Hi, Liberty. There is one more question that has popped up.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Metaverse development platform or software? And how does one create the avatars once we have the Oculus headset? It's slightly technical.
Sure. So as far as the development platform, there are a few. Unity is the big one, but there are a few different platforms out there to build within. And then once you create the avatars, once you're in the headset, you actually are able to customize your avatar completely. I'm wondering if you guys can see this. As I saw that question, I brought up my own avatar. I don't know if you guys can see that. That's me. I developed that avatar. So I don't know if you guys can see it. Anyway, it's a pretty close approximation. So we can, oh, Manju, if you just reminds us that if you'd like us to share this video, please send your email address so that you can have the recording. But the avatars you actually create yourself once you're in the headset. Okay, any other questions? If not, thank you guys so much for joining us today. There is obviously a lot to talk about here, some really neat use cases, and I can't wait to continue the conversation. Awesome. Have a great rest of your day. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My email address is there. I'd love to continue the discussion, and we will share this recording. Okay. Awesome. If there's nothing else, have a great one. Thanks all.